All right, so I think, it's 3:03 here in Santiago, Chile, a very hot afternoon, summer afternoon. Last time we did a webinar, Rafa, we were in, I don't know, not Chile, but rather nice weather, Punta Arenas, last month. It was pretty cool to be able to host a webinar from Explorer's House, our home for our Antarctica cruises. This time around, we're doing a different subject. It's our sea voyages, so our trips that do not include a flying leg and that focus on mostly on the sub-Antarctic region of the world. So, as you might know us already, my name is Renato Marín. I am the sales manager for the B2C channel here at Antarctica 21. And joining me today, my colleague Rafael Guzmán, who not only has been to Antarctica, but also to some of these amazing destinations that we'll be talking about, right, Rafa?
That's right. So in that picture, you'll be able to see, that flight behind me, that plane is the one that gets to Antarctica. But yeah, I mean, I'm from Chile, so I've always loved to explore the region. Some of these places I've explored for myself and some other I've explored with Antarctica 21. So I'm very fond of RC voyages specifically.
Exactly. All right, so let's get into it. First, let's just, take a look at this awesome video that captures, what it is a landing in. And I think you were mentioning last time we were discussing the Sanders Island, right?
Yeah, the place you see in the video is Saunders Island in the Falklands, which is the first leg of the Falklands and South Georgia itinerary. Honestly, when I got on that ship, I was just thinking about South Georgia, but the Falklands on the way, as you're able to see in that video, is just this incredible place that is the Neck, which is the first place we were able to visit. Just crazy white beaches full of penguins. It's very bizarre to see that mix.
Crystal clear water as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely wild. It's very different from what you see in a place like Antarctica, and also very different from what you'd expect. I've seen a billion pictures of these places, but to be there, just a lot of different things jump out at you.
All right. So, as you know, we are known for being the early cruise specialists, pioneers of the model, focusing on the Antarctic Peninsula, on our classic Antarctica itinerary for the most part, although offering other combinations, shorter and longer. But we do also offer some sailing trips that explore, like we were mentioning earlier, the broader sub-Antarctic region that includes Patagonia, Chilean fjords, the Falklands, South Georgia, and also there's a trip that combines these two destinations with Antarctica. So some of the things that stand out when thinking about these sailing trips is not only that they're also being done in the same ships that we use for Antarctica, that, as you know, are considered small ships. So less than 100 people, allow you to go further, to disembark all at once, making it a more efficient, seamless operation. But also, they also provide a really good value for your money in terms of the amount of days that you will be spending on board the ship, right? Like these trips, like the shortest trip is
9 days.
9 days, right? So like that's like the starting amount of days that you'll be spending in some of these trips, which is longer than the Antarctic Express or the classic Antarctica that is just around that mark.
Yeah, you spread everything around in within more days, so it's just more time to explore. You're getting more out of the flight you took down. Antarctica is incredible. Most people go for the 8-day option, but making it all the way down for 8 days, for some people it's perfect. Some people might want to get more out of getting all the way down to Patagonia. So this just extends everything for a bit longer.
Exactly. And as we continue, like I was mentioning, sure, like for some people, Antarctica is a trigger to make it this south on the globe. But then some people realize that there are other destinations within this region that are also worth a visit. Like I was saying, Patagonia, the Chilean fjords, the Falklands, South Georgia, and Antarctica as well. So we've come up with some points that we think are worth mentioning as to what you can expect in these sea voyages, as we like to call this season within a season, because normally these trips actually start earlier than our Antarctic trips, and they finish later, right? So that's what we like to call them, the shoulder season.
That's right. I think the first point is pretty key. It became pretty relevant about 2 weeks ago when we were down in Patagonia with Renato, talking to people that were embarking. In this case, they were heading out to Antarctica, and something really common between everybody that we spoke to was that they're not really cruise people. You know, they'd been maybe on a 2,000-person cruise once, and it wasn't for them. This is much more of a yacht-like small ship, more exclusive experience where you end up meeting everybody you're traveling with. The expedition team, they become really close. It's very friendly on board. They end up feeling like very close friends, and they really kind of deepen the perspective that you get about these places during the trip. They're incredibly passionate, and with a small group of guests, they can really transmit that passion. I think everybody that comes back always ends up kind of with this newfound passion and curiosity for the whys behind these places, kind of the science behind it. What makes it so interesting isn't just what you're seeing, but what's behind as well.
I think that's key, because some people, you know, like when I talk to people and I tell them that I work for a cruise company, expedition cruise, it's for the average person, it's hard to differentiate cruising these huge ships that carry, you know, thousands of people, to the small ships that we use to go to these amazing destinations, and that focus on the destination rather than the ship and what you can do on board. So what you just mentioned, Rafa, it's basically the gist of, you know, coming to these places, getting to know them, and then falling in love with them, and becoming an advocate for, you know, for the Antarctic, for the Falklands, for South Georgia, and so on.
You have it much more to yourself, the place itself, and the guides that are attending. So no question goes unanswered. You always find the moment to raise any questions, any concerns. So it's really incredible and quite the deep dive. And history, the second point there, ends up being a huge point as well, because Antarctica already has a ton of history, mainly in the exploration side of things, and then science, Shackleton being a main one, but South Georgia ends up being much more of a factor in Shackleton's life. It's where he died. It's where he arrived after his famous or infamous, depending on how you see it, expedition. It's where he's buried. You hear a lot about Shackleton in Antarctica, but you get to see much more of the remains of what he did in South Georgia, with the whaling stations mainly. The waterfall that was his last kind of thing he had to surpass before getting to Stromness. So it ends up being a much deeper dive. Also, the environment there allows for the whaling stations are pretty much the best example to be way better maintained.
Of course, right? Like, and as you know, like when Shackleton was coming back to the continent, and you know they were forced to go to Elephant Island, and then he selected a few to go back, ended up making to South Georgia, crossing these ice field, and arriving behind the town that he had visited roughly a year ago. So, you know, like we're talking like 100 years ago, these people were out of their mind, like seeing these bearded guys coming where no one has come ever before. And, you know,
everybody knew Shackleton, but nobody recognized him when he got to the whaling stations because he looked so different. I'd seen footage, pictures of South Georgia and the places he crossed to get to the whaling station, but when you see it from the ship, just how big and rugged those mountains are, it just completely changed my perspective on the whole story.
Exactly. So I think for the people that have, and going back to point two, a keen interest in history, it's probably, these destinations are already in the back of their head as they're deciding where to go next or what to consider too for the first time even. Then, like we were mentioning, for the amount of days that you will be spending on sea, the price range that we offer, it's really, really good when you compare it with other companies that combine these destinations with Antarctica for the most part. It's hard to find, like we have, and we'll talk about it a little into the presentation. This amazing, I think for me, one of the best trips that you've been to, the Falklands and South Georgia. It's hard to find that same itinerary on other companies. So without being combined with either Antarctica or with the Chilean fjords, making it 20-day quest or something like that, which it's not for the faint of heart.
And it's much more of a deep dive into exactly what you want to see instead of having it be combined with some place you might have already seen or don't really have any initial interest in seeing. And what you said about Falklands and South Georgia applies to the Patagonian fjords as well. I've been looking into cruises, small ships that do Patagonian fjords, and all of them do either the bottom half of the fjords or the top half of the fjords. So that's being a really, really, really tough decision on where should I focus. This one does it all in one go. You don't need to book two different trips. You have absolutely every section of the fjords in a single trip. So it's like two birds with one stone.
That's quite an unique experience. Yeah, and we'll talk more about that. Don't worry. I think you did mention before that one of the key aspects of our boutique experience is that we have a really high ratio of staff to guests. So it's roughly 13 polar guides per trip, which is one of the highest in the industry. And that makes for a more, I'm not going to say personalized because it's still, this is not a tailor-made trip, but it is quite intimate. By the end of your trip, you'll be on a first-name basis with not only the staff, but also the crew on board, which will go above and beyond for your comfort, and just make it something to remember your whole life.
Yeah, and different people will have different reasons to go to any of these places, and that's a really good thing about having 13 guides, and everybody is an expert on something different. So the person that wants to go to South Georgia for the history, there's going to be a history expert that'll know absolutely everything about what you're seeing. Like the expert on this trip, I asked him the most specific questions I could think of, and he was just so passionate about it. He knew absolutely everything about every corner of Antarctica. The person that wants to go because of penguins or wildlife, there will be somebody for that you can channel all the questions to. Same thing about Patagonia, which has its own history. Somebody will be able to give you some extra background there. When it comes to climate change, it's something all of these people are incredibly passionate about, so they'll be able to kind of really enrich the experience on that side. I mean, the two people in that picture,
Anais and
Anais and Pancho,
shout
not
out
like
to them.
somebody specific stands out because everybody is just so inspiring and passionate, just an absolute expert on what they're doing. Some of them have double doctorates on some specific thing they just absolutely obsess about. So
they're nerding the best way.
Yeah. I mean, it's if you love David Attenborough and nature documentaries, then this trip is just an absolute treat.
Yeah, and so that if you're aware, the PTGA, the Polar Tourism Guides Association, some of the people that work with us either started that association or are a part of it now, which guarantees this really high level of professionalism and knowledge on our staff. All right, and last but not least, we are advocates for trying to leave the least impact possible on our operations. That's why we are a certified carbon neutral company. We're always trying to reduce our emissions and working ways that make our operation as cleaner as possible. And while we advocate for these destinations and bring people to experience these trips that will transform their lives, basically.
Yeah, everybody's incredibly passionate about these places, so nobody wants to be able to visit them knowing that what they're going to be doing is going to have a negative impact. So it's all about going, but going in the most responsible way possible. So it's been really interesting to see the different initiatives that have been taking place to have this really sincerely be as responsible as we can make it.
Of course, and as a member of the Association of Antarctic Tour Operators, we oblige by their rules. All right, so I know we've dabbled a little bit with some of the destinations and trips that are on offer as of yesterday, but let's go dive into them. All right, so I'll let you take this one. I know you like it.
Yeah, I mean, I like all of them, but Patagonia has a really special place in my heart. It's probably one of the places I've explored the most. And I think a big challenge in Patagonia, and people that have already traveled there probably know exactly what I'm talking about, is it is so big that it's really hard to prioritize what you want to see in the amount of days that you have. I spent way too many days in Google Earth zooming into every single nook and cranny and anywhere that looked interesting, and just it becomes too overwhelming. So when this option actually started being a thing in Antarctica 21, I was extremely curious and excited to see what places were going to be visited. It's an extremely remote place with corners that are really, really hard to get to. So I wanted to see what was actually possible in a ship like the Magellan Explorer. And I'm really proud to say that this trip pretty much hits every single spot you'd want to hit on a trip like this one. As you can see in the map, it's also a very well protected sailing route. You're always within the fjords themselves without having to go out to open ocean, with one exception where you see the ship there called the Gulf of Penas. Penas meaning sadness. I'm guessing some people have had a bad time there, but it's a very short and exposed place that a lot of people don't really have an issue with. But it really mixes wild landscapes and ice and rainforests and forests with also places that have people living in them, like very small towns that you can't reach by car. That are in a small island in the middle of the fjords in Patagonia. And this ship is able to visit them all. So these are places that haven't been spoiled by tourism, mass tourism. Probably it's not going to be spoiled in a long time. So to me, this is just one of the best kept secrets in the world. Not even people that go to South Georgia a lot of times know about this. So
exactly.
I'm really, really excited about this one.
So yeah, very remote regions of the world. You start in the province of Tierra del Fuego, where Ushuaia is located. You go through Glacier Alley, the Beagle Channel, and then you start making your way up the Chilean fjords, and then some through the archipelago of Chiloé, and then you end in, well, that's actually because this trip has two 18. So this itinerary has two trips. One actually starts in Puerto Montt in the north and finishes in Ushuaia. That's the first of the season. And then the last of the season, it's the other way around. You start in Ushuaia and you finish in Puerto Montt in Chile's Lake District, which is also another destination if you want to combine it with. Amazing. So yeah, definitely want to check out if you want to stick to the continent.
I'll be very excited if you ask me about this one later.
Yeah. All right. And as Rafa was mentioning, huge glaciers, forests, whales, seals. Disclaimer, Humboldt penguins, they can be found, but they're normally present during the summer. So this trip actually takes place first during the spring, our spring, southern hemisphere, and then during our fall or autumn, depending on where you live. So yeah, it's actually, this happened during a trip. I double checked, but it's not something that normal for that time of the year. All right, Rafa, and I think, well, you're the expert in this one. You've been to this trip that starts, it's back to back, right?
Right.
So it's normally the second and third trips of the seasons, or more or less.
Third, fourth sometimes. But yeah, an absolute gem. I think one of the highlights, surprisingly, is how long it is, 17 days. The people I met during this trip are friends to this day. We talk constantly. And since it's a small ship, you really get to meet everybody. The people that have spent some time in Santiago after the trip, I've been able to meet with them. So I think it's really incredible to be able to not only have a deep dive into a region, but the people you're traveling with as well, which is something that becomes possible because it's a small ship. So this one visits two main destinations, the Falklands and South Georgia. I think I said it before going on this trip, I was pretty much only excited about South Georgia Falklands. I didn't know too much about it, some history, but it wasn't really in my radar. And it ended up being just an absolutely incredible place I fell in love with. I was absolutely surprised by it. While South Georgia just has this overwhelming amount of wildlife, and it's just delight to the senses, but so overwhelming at the same time. Falklands, and especially since it's before and after South Georgia, it kind of leads you into it, and then it just kind of gives you some mental rest after the absolute intensity and frenzy that you see in South Georgia. South Georgia, of course, is known for its wild amount of wildlife, like you can see, especially on that picture on the left.
Bay.
That's in that picture's in Golden Harbor, where we actually able to have a sunrise landing. So we were on the shore as the sun rose. We actually had some landings where we were at the shore during sunset as well, which is benefit of going on the dates that we go very early in the season when sunrises and sunsets are still kind of at.
These pictures are actually from your trip, right?
Yeah, I see all these pictures and I kind of get pretty excited about them. So yeah, for photography nerds, this trip is just an absolute gem because wildlife is everywhere. I'm not a wildlife photographer, I do landscape, but I could really kind of stretch my creative nerves during this trip. I could go beyond my comfort zone in a way that really kind of allowed me to experiment a lot with my photography. And then when it comes to the landscape, it's game in itself. I mean, my favorite pictures of my whole life are going to be from this trip. You can see on the bottom picture in the middle, it's one of the whaling stations that you have in South Georgia. It's Stromness, where Shackleton arrived first in South Georgia and then had a last short crossing to get to Grytviken. And there's an elephant seal on the right side. You don't see a lot of them on the picture on the left because they blend in really nicely with the sand, but they're everywhere. They're absolutely enormous. They have this wild roar you can feel from miles away. And since they're so huge, they'll squish penguins. It's pretty brutal to see. And this time in the season is actually when they're arriving to the shore and they're having their first territorial fight. So it's when you get those big bull fights that you see in documentaries, just these 3-ton, I'm not sure how heavy they are, beasts clashing against each other. So some people, they just read online that January is when there's most wildlife and they'll think that's the best time to go, but really it's already an overwhelming amount of wildlife. And if you go in January, it's so much that in a lot of places you're not even going to be able to land because there's no gap between the wildlife to get off the ship. We just had enough space during this trip. So yeah, to me, October in South Georgia is incredible. Sunrise, sunsets, a wild amount of wildlife, but not too much that you can't even see them.
Or no ships.
Less ships. We didn't see a single one during October. I think there was another one like on the other side of the island, but it didn't even cross paths.
For the birders, is this Prime Island? Are those black brow albatross all there? Throw my 2 cents there.
I'm not sure which island it is because a lot of them have these big albatross colonies, the biggest wingspan of any bird in the world. I'm not big on birding. It's always been a huge challenge for me, but I guess I became one during this trip. Just an absolutely incredible bird to see in person.
Yeah, and well, as you know, yeah, even if we do, talk about places and animals, every trip is different than the last one. Is and weather, as in Antarctica, rules. So it's important to manage your expectations about what is possible to see and then what you will be able to see in the end, because that's what expedition cruising is about, knowing that you can go somewhere but maybe you won't be seeing what you want to see, because that's the dice roll.
Yeah. Part of the, for any of the destinations we're talking about, part of the charm is the challenge, right? If you want an easy-going trip where your belly's pointing to the sun and you have incredible weather every single day, I can think of the Caribbean or Mediterranean, where you're gonna have incredible conditions for sure every single day. Here, for these places, I'm guessing everybody here kind of likes the grit of harsh wind and intense snow or rain. The excitement that comes with it. So, I'm hoping you're all here for it.
Exactly. All right. So last one was Falklands and South Georgia, which, even though you might have picked up that it said only one departure, there's actually two, but the first one has been chartered, and the second one already is running low on availability. So if you're somewhat interested, you need to push for information and dates and availability, because unfortunately it'll run out pretty soon. And then we have this other trip that it's basically the one before with Antarctica, on the last leg of that trip. And even though this one is available right now, it's normally chartered. So that's also something to consider, that down the line it might happen. But in any case, if it happens, we can redirect you to the company that buys the trip, so that you can book through them. But what would you say, like, this is?
Yeah, it's a home run of a trip. The combination is absolutely mind-blowing. To be able to do all three in one go is pretty unbelievable. And part of what makes it unbelievable is how far everything is. So there's a lot of days at sea and a limited amount of time in each of these places. So I think the benefit here is just hitting all these places in one go. But I think it's also important to know that you might be rushing through a place you want to give more attention to, just to be able to have enough time at the next place. So in South Georgia, for example, I think we were able to spend 5, 6, maybe 7 days in total. There's not a single place I would have left out on those landings. And a trip like this one, to accommodate all three, you need to leave some places out of the plan. So yeah, huge benefit of going to all three, but in my preference is just treating Antarctica and South Georgia and Falklands like their own separate trips. And if you can only do one, I just recommend going for the one you want to do most, because it's a place that you'll see, and by the time you're leaving, you won't even realize, and you're already kind of moving to the next place, which is a great option for some types of travelers, but I wouldn't want anybody to feel like they just kind of brushed through one destination. But yeah, I mean, being in Port Stanley and South Georgia after a few days, and then a few days later being in Antarctica, the contrast that you get is unbelievable.
It's also very early in the season. This trip normally takes place in November, so lots of snow in Antarctica. I think Brian Sandy, sorry, I can't remember the last name. I just read the question quickly. Ask about the timing of the pictures that we show on the previous slides, and sure, it was October.
Yeah, right? October for all those pictures in Falklands and South Georgia. For Antarctica, you can expect the most snow that anybody's going to be seeing that season, because it's pretty much the first trip that arrives to Antarctica the whole season. I'm pretty sure it's the only ship in the area. So you're going to be seeing the most Antarctic side of Antarctica, which makes it more authentic, I think, in a way, but also you know, it's going to be iced all over, and you're probably going to end up iced all over by the end of the trip as well.
Yeah, and as you can see, and this route is, you know, the most, you can take it as symbolical rather than literally where it goes. But our air cruises, they focus on the peninsula, on the west side of the peninsula, whereas this trip kind of goes straight to where the Gerlach Strait is, more or less, right, Rafa? And kind of like just shoots over the part of the peninsula that you would be exploring on an air cruise.
Yeah, you got to go straight where the meat is, where the most interesting spots are. And also you're going to need to look at how conditions are looking and prioritize wherever the best opportunities are. So in this, you might get to the peninsula, maybe during the trip for the amount of time you have, spending more time in the South Shetland Islands might be better. So, you know, you might not get to the peninsula. In any case, the expedition leader is going to be looking for the best opportunities, not a hit list of, you know, places that are most famous, but where the best conditions and wildlife is going to be given the conditions that we're getting.
Exactly. So like you were saying, you know, if you want to do them all at once because you only want to go make it, you know, this far once in your lifetime, then, you know, this is the option.
Checking them all off. It's a good option.
But if not, then, you know, probably do an air cruise to Antarctica, focus on the peninsula, and then, you know, take that loyalty discount,
right,
and, you know, make it even better to go to the Falklands and South Georgia. And as this is an amazing mix of, you know, icebergs, king penguins on the shores of the Falklands, fluffy brown king penguin chicks.
Crazy amount of penguins. You get a really good variety of penguin species in South Georgia. It's not just king penguins, but you get
macaroni.
Yeah, all these. I think I saw every possible penguin species for the region during this trip. You also, even though you're going to South Georgia, which isn't Antarctica when it comes to you know, ice sheet cover, it's more in the mountains in South Georgia. South Georgia's on the path of Iceberg Alley that takes all these huge icebergs towards Antarctica. And I actually saw more impressive icebergs on Iceberg Alley than what I saw in Antarctica. And that picture is actually a day before getting to South Georgia, two icebergs that were on the path. So yeah, I mean, it's sub-Antarctic region. You better expect some pretty big icebergs on the way.
All right. So one of the points was, you know, the size, the speed of you know, what our boutique expeditions are made of, and that's only possible because we use small vessels like the Magellan Explorer, which was custom built here in Chile for Antarctic exploration. You know, carries for these trips under 100 people, 95, 96 in the case of the air cruises, 76. And, you know, it's just home away from home, comfort, space, a place to, you know, to get together with the people you meet on your trip.
Yeah,
and unwind.
You get pretty tired out during this trip. So for us, at the end of the day, these small ships are incredible and stunning, but they're just the tools we need. They're just tools that we need to get to the place where we need to be and get the best possible rest that we can to have a lot of energy to explore the next day. So, you know, you won't find a casino on board. You'll just find everything you need to really get the best quality rest of your life. Incredible. I mean, there's the dining room, best food ever for 17 days. I could really kind of fuel up before the next day.
Exactly. And then even though for these Sea Voyages season, there won't be any trips on the Discover yet, because it would be its first season. So we're still working on the scheduling and increased number of trips that will probably boast in, you know, a couple seasons later. And as we've talked about in our last webinar, it's just, you know, an upgrade on the Explorer, taking what we've learned and just taking the Antarctica 21 experience into a whole different level, considering also fuel emissions and things that can impact that realm, right?
A lot of innovation. I think I mentioned it in the last webinar. While in 2019, when the Magellan Explorer was launched, it was well ahead of its time. It's the same thing for this ship. It's going to be launched in 2026, and it's already ahead of its time for that time. It's going to have one of the most advanced combustion systems on any ship.
Yeah, and just, like what Raf is referring to is that it has this hybrid electric propulsion grid that combines both fuel use and then electric propulsion. And it uses these amazing azimuths that can rotate 360 degrees, making the ship use less fuel. In a lifetime of the ship, it'll be hundreds or thousands of tons of fuel that won't be used because of this. And then, also complying with the same regulations as Explorer. It just, it's really a testament of our commitment to reducing our emissions. And as a side note, starting this season, we've started to use synthetic e-fuel on our Zodiacs. So that is something that we're working as well, and that hopefully in coming years it will grow in the scale of our operation.
And it's not just talking the talk, it's walking the walk as well. And something interesting about the expedition team as well is since they're extremely passionate about these places and have studies in the area as well. Even if we wanted to, which we definitely don't ever, wanted to get away with not being as responsible as possible, they wouldn't let us get away with it.
Exactly. And just a couple features that we didn't mention that, average size of cabin has increased, higher ceilings. There will be a really nice lab, wet lab for our passengers to do our citizen science projects that we include in our trips. And I think that'll, in the case of the Magellan, this is not present in the Explorer, sorry, both are Magellan. But the Discoverer will boast this wet lab, which will be amazing.
Citizen science has been an incredible hit on board, so it's definitely something we want to work more on.
Exactly. And even though for these trips, Explorer's House doesn't play such a pivotal role, unfortunately, because it is our home. It does come, I mean, when you went to the Falklands and South Georgia, the trips starting and finishing in Punta Arenas, you had to go to Explorer's House to get together and then go to the port from there, right?
Explorer's House was the meeting area. We spent a few hours there. For these trips, the boots are provided, so that's where we tried on the boots, the gear for Antarctica. There's a gear shop in case you missed anything packing. You can have a drink, you can have some coffee, you can get some food, some breakfast that morning, since you're going to be pretty excited. So even though it's not as prevalent as it is during air cruises, we're having the welcome dinner as well and the briefings, it still ends up being home base and kind of pushes you into the experience before even having to board the ship.
And for those of you who are not familiar with Explorer's House, this historic building used to be a wool
processing,
not factory, like a place to storage for wool. That's what Patagonia was known for, is still known for to some degree these days, as part of what economic activities you can find down there. And it kept its original structure, but it was transformed into this guest house, private expedition club, where our guests can start their trip once they arrive in Punta Arenas. They don't have to wait until they get to the ship. Like the same level of hospitality, food, service will be found here.
Yeah, the team down there is incredible. And when you walk through Punta Arenas, you'll notice a lot of really beautiful historic buildings. You know, a city like that might not be able to preserve all of them, so it's really incredible to see kind of a private company jump in and kind of help preserve the character of a city that is end of the world and has some incredible history.
Yeah, like these auditorium is where our briefings take place. Like on the first floor, there's a dining room for our dinners or lunches, depending. There's a lot of space to sit down and unwind, read something, have a coffee, interactive screens to know more about our destinations, and also some of the work that our foundation does as well to spread the knowledge related to Antarctica done in Chile. All right, and something that we didn't mention before, but it's definitely an aspect to consider for those of you more on the adventure side, is the additional excursions that make a part of our trips. And for these itineraries, some of these activities are not done in all of the trips. Such is the case of the sea kayaking program, which is only available in the itineraries that include Antarctica and Patagonia. So, for example, the one that you did that combines Falklands and South Georgia did not have this option available.
Right. It was in the roster for the October trip, but you know, it was realized during this trip that South Georgia, the place we were landing in, are much more exposed than what some bays are in Antarctica. So the possibility just didn't come up as often as it does in Antarctica. So we decided to just focus on the general landings as much as possible, and then leave kayaking for Antarctica in places like Patagonia. And when I say they're more exposed, you know, we're not facing big swells, you know, in my experience in South Georgia, but for kayaking, you know, you really have to be sensitive to conditions that are as safe as possible.
Exactly. And in a nutshell, you know, there are two groups of 10 participants each that alternate. So that means ideally every day, weather permitting. During the first disembarkation in the morning, people that have signed up for the sea kayaking program, they'll venture out a little earlier. And then halfway, which is normally an hour to an hour and a half, halfway through the general disembarkation, they will rejoin the rest of the group and then go back to the ship. Then in the afternoon, if it's also possible, then the second group will do the same. And if not, because sometimes, you know, weather says no, and there's no morning landing or afternoon landing or no landing at all, even though for the most part, that's not the case, but just so you know, then it'll be, you know, like the next day or the next available time for this. And that's how it will work during your trip.
The team's always in the search for the right conditions for it. Sometimes the weather says otherwise.
Exactly. And then the other additional activity that we offer is hiking and snowshoeing, which in this case is only available in trips that go to Antarctica. And, you know, in the case of the trip, the itinerary that covers the 3 destinations, going early in the season, I think increases the chances of doing hiking, snowshoeing, particularly snowshoeing, because hiking, you can always find a route different than the general landing to do so. But yeah, there'll be more snow in Antarctica in that time of the year. And opposed to the case of sea kayaking, which has to be booked in advance, hiking and snowshoeing will need to be booked on board. And it can be a one-off as opposed to the sea kayaking.
Yeah, in a place like Antarctica, the higher altitude that you get, the better the perspective you have on the size of everything, the proportions of the area you're in. Because when you're seeing it from the ship, look outside and there's no people, no cars, no buildings,
no reference.
Yeah, so you're kind of lost in trying to just realize how big that iceberg looks. So when you get some altitude, look down, look at the people that look like ants, and that iceberg that you saw from on board the ship, you realize it is 5 times the ship itself. You kind of realize just how out of this world the places where you are.
I think that's the thing about Antarctica, like the reference or like these places in general, like Sub-Antarctica, Antarctica, like there's no, for the most part, no human presence, so it's hard to, get a glance of how big that is.
Really feels like another planet. Never in any place with huge mountains or anything have I felt so kind of confused about what I'm seeing. It's just so beyond anything that you could find anywhere else that your mind has a hard time processing what you're seeing. It's exciting, very cool.
All right, so now that we've covered, what these itineraries are all about, the itineraries themselves, the activities that you do, and what surrounds our operation, we always like to go through some of our essential planning travel tips, especially knowing that having so few, like a ship under 100 people, it's not a lot. Like it.
Yeah, like Renato said, the Falkland South Georgia trip already, I think, is more than 50% booked.
Exactly. So planning ahead, my first point, it's super important. And I know that it's difficult to grasp the idea of booking something that will happen in almost 2 years' time or even more. But planning ahead, and as you will see in a couple of slides, not only gives you sometimes an economic advantage, but also you can choose, maybe the desired cabin or the date that you want to do if there's a couple options. So definitely, do that.
Yeah, I never pressure anybody in booking a trip like this at all because it's huge. But it is important to know the urgency is a rough word, but how sought after a trip like this is.
Exactly. That's the word, I think. And then, these places are these are remote destinations, like actually remote. That being said, Chile is very far away from everything as well. If most of our customers, they come from the US, and even Miami, probably the closest flight to Santiago, it's 8 hours. And then 3 hours and a half from Santiago to Punta Arenas. So you're looking at only flight time, 11 hours and a half. Like you're pushing to 12 hours, and we're in the same continent. I mean, there's
Right.
there are different ways of looking at it, but yeah. So building buffers on both ends of your trip so that if there is a disruption of any kind within the trip itself, not before, you are not left out hanging.
Right.
Yeah.
If you miss this ship, you probably won't be able to find another one in 2 years or something. So definitely don't risk it, please.
Exactly. Yeah. Go to Patagonia. Do the W track. Do some clamping. Do some gaucho stuff. Explore Tierra del Fuego. Go to Punta Arenas.
There's stuff to do. So the buffer isn't something where you're just waiting around for the trip to start. You're having a whole other experience on top of what you're planning with this trip.
Luggage is also something that is very frequently asked, and in our experience, people always overpacked, end up overpacking, and not using half or a third of what they bring. And there's a laundry service on board, which for some of the most technical items that you'll be bringing, if they get dirty, you can send them to get clean and get them back in the how's that process, Rafa? You've done it.
Yeah, I understand why people overpack. It's a faraway place. It can be pretty extreme. But the guides that are in the brochure, on the welcome on board documents that we send later on, that's really all you need. And if you're on the fence about something, just ask. I mean, we're here for every single question. There's no ridiculous questions. I've already heard all of them. So count on us to help get rid of any questions you may have.
And then next, of course, travel insurance. I think nowadays, or after the pandemic, it has become something that people beforehand didn't consider or did not consider in the same manner as they do today. I'm sure you're spending a lot of money. So considering a comprehensive policy that it covers trip interruption or medical expenses, medical evacuation, that really can make or break an experience like this when it goes south, or in worst case scenarios, in 2 years sometimes you have relatives with injuries or health conditions, or you have a baby there.
Right.
Things change, right? And we understand. So at the same time, we're a small company, that as much flexibility as we can provide, sometimes having been covered makes all the difference.
Yeah, when you book a year and a half and more in advance, imagine all the things that can happen in that time. So touch wood, everything is all right, but it can be a huge lifesaver, or avoid yourself some headaches, and just having that backup.
And last, visa requirements. This might be something obvious, but like visas are, even for strong passports, they're very fluid. Like year over year, when you see this Henley passport index, sure, it's the same 10 countries for the most part, but they're always interchanging places, and that's because this country remove them from their visa entry program, or these other are requiring them to have a visa issue in advance, of course. So it's best to double check, triple check from the moment that you book until some months before your trip, so that if that changes, you still have some time to request that.
Definitely monitor it as time passes, just in case.
Chile is a very open country in that regard, but better be safe than sorry. Exactly. And as I was mentioning, we do have something to entice you, an early booking promotion, which offers $2,000 off per person on the Falklands and South Georgia trips, and also on the trip that goes to 3 destinations, and then $1,000 off on the Patagonian Chilean fjords. One thing that normally people ask, especially the ones that have traveled with us before, or the ones that are traveling with children, is, can we combine different discounts, like loyalty discount for repeating travelers, or child discounts with this? And the answer is no. In the end, the highest discount is the one that applies.
Right, and the 2,000 per person, for example, well, both of these can easily be more than those other discounts. So just because you have one, you might want to insure one of these anyways.
Exactly. So yeah, and this is valid until the end of March this year. So yeah, definitely take advantage of them. All right, and now it's time for the questions. I know that you've been sending we have 13 so far, so let's go through them as we still have some time. All right, let's go chronological. All right, and I think these answers were Louis Elliott was asking about the possibility of combining discounts, and I think that's been answered. Then Brian, I think we'll also address this with this question about. So his question is too early, September, October, to see wildlife in South Georgia, and what about the weather, if it can be that during that time of the year versus December, February? And I think, Rafa, you having gone,
it's always going to be a roll of the dice, the weather. My trip in October, we were extremely lucky. We got really incredible days every single day. We were able to land everywhere we wanted to, but it's a roll of the dice. I know the trip before ours, there were some places I saw some pictures and they looked very different, but that doesn't mean it's better or worse. They saw some places and they had a lot of snow, but that really brought out something else in the landscape. And the trip I had in October, having those good conditions in December or in January, it might not be possible either. It's always going to be roll the dice when it comes to wildlife as well. It's a really good time to go because the 500,000 penguins are still going to be in St. Andrews Bay.
They're not going anywhere. Yeah.
And when you go later, there's still going to be more wildlife in January, but a lot of times that doesn't lead to better conditions for wildlife watching. That there's more doesn't mean that it's going to be easier. Because there's so much wildlife that you just can't find the gap to park the Zodiac to be able to actually land in that area. And St. Andrews Bay, actually, I joined the expedition team member that was preparing the path that everybody was going to be following. And it was a huge challenge. We'd go up a hill and a billion penguins blocking the way. We'd have to backtrack and just find another way. Also, fur seals are born. There were some fur seal babies while we were there, but most of them are born later and they're pretty aggressive. So some important landing sites also close later in the season because some animals can be more aggressive, even though they're small. And you know, they're more sensitive to presence, so we're just not allowed to disembark there later on. So I was concerned about the same thing before going, but I found that October, I've never been in January, but I can't imagine it being any better.
Yeah, it's a good question, Brian. I think so. Faye asked about why we only do this trip that combines the three destinations in the shoulder season, and the answer is because we focus on Antarctica during the austral summer, and that's why we do these trips before and or after that as an Antarctic specialist.
Cool fact about early season as well. We were able to see the Aurora Australis. It's like the auroras from the north, but the ones that happen in the southern hemisphere. That
the southern lights in this case, right?
Yeah, it was. I didn't believe it was possible, even though I've been to Patagonia a billion times. And there they were.
So Tracy, I think maybe we did answer your questions about bringing back the South Georgian Falklands. Yes, we do. So
there it is.
Exactly. If you are interested, now is the time.
There's a question about the likeliness of adding Snow Hill to the offerings in the future. Anything can happen. I wouldn't think so. It's, you know, one of the big places to go see in Antarctica, but the western side of the peninsula just has much more variety and things to see. You know, Snow Hill has emperor penguins, but you know, emperor penguins and tabular icebergs, not the mountains that you see on the western side either. So there's just more to gain for us for what we want to see on the western side rather than the eastern side of the peninsula.
All right, since it's already 4, we'll pick a few more questions before having to finish the presentation. But yeah, so I think, Brian, we did answer that as well, that the pictures were from the trip in October. And I don't know, Rafi, if you want to elaborate a little bit about the amount of snow and ice that was found during that time of the year.
Yep. So another concern I also had before going was the amount of snow and ice that we have during those dates. Actually, my concern was that there was going to be too much snow and ice during October. But really, I mean, the reason for me wanting that is because I really like the deep greens that I saw in pictures and documentaries of South Georgia. And I didn't want places like Grytviken to be iced over. And really in October, there was still a ton of ice and snow, but not much. I mean, the picture you're seeing there really doesn't have much more towards the mountains. Still, it's a more exposed part of the island where you'd still see less ice and snow during the season. Salisbury Plain, for example, had a ton of ice and snow, which really gave a lot of variety to the pictures we were taking versus St. Andrews that didn't have as much snow. But the week before we went, the ship was there as well with another group, and Salisbury Plain was completely iced over the beach and everything. So you could still see a lot of ice and snow, just as much as you might not see that much. It's during the season, it's kind of just leaving that iced over part of the season. So I was very lucky to get a mix of both. Not a huge amount of either, but kind of a nice midpoint.
Yeah, and it's always hard with weather. Like it's impossible to forecast with 100% accuracy. So yeah, a bit touch and go there.
There's a question asking when the 2028 options are going to open up, which just goes to show how early on these are booked. Sorry to say that it's going to be probably until next year, January, February next year. So
we'll
I'll
come
talk to
soon
you
enough.
then.
All right, so I think this is a good question from Darren Wilson that they're interested in booking the Falklands, South Georgia, and Antarctica, and they're asking about what would happen if they book directly, but then it gets chartered. So the situation there is that you can either keep the booking through them, or you can have an option to, to either get a full refund or do a different trip, discussions to be offered at that moment.
Yeah, solutions always found.
Mm-hmm. All right, and I think, well, about the bird flu, Rafa, I know that that's a concern, since last year. How was the latest update about that?
Yeah, it's a huge concern for everyone, the people doing science there, and for us as visitors as well. And fortunately, it hasn't spread as quickly as expectations were at the beginning. I guess the cold, for some reason, or whatever it may be, has helped the spread be really, really slow and contained. It actually arrived about a year before I was able to go, and this season it really didn't get in the way of the landings. The way it worked is the expedition team, some chosen people in the group got in the expedition team group, not the guests, got off the ship before everybody else and just scoured looking for anything that might be suspicious, that there might be bird flu present in the area. Fortunately, it was never the case. The places where we landed, every dead penguin, which are there, unfortunately, was clearly that because of another cause, just bites or being squished by an elephant seal, and not because of the bird flu. Still, all the precautions are taken. We provide the boots in part because every time we get off and on the ship, we pass the boots through a chemical that gets rid of anything that might spread the disease. So we don't want guests passing their boots through these harsh chemicals. The South Georgia government keeps a very close watch on the way ships operate. The things that were implemented to avoid the spread were things we were already doing. And ever since the bird flu arrived, every single departure has had the highest possible grade of biosecurity between what's possible, including mine. So fortunately, we were already taking the precautions that are needed, and that has us as experts in doing them as well as possible.
All right. So unfortunately, it's time to go. I know that there are some questions that didn't get answered, but like I said, we will do a selection, send you a follow-up email. And, if the question that you send wasn't answered, then you can still reach out and we will answer to your particular question. All right. So thanks for joining us today. That's Rafa's email if you want to hit him up. Thanks for your time. It was, as always, very entertaining to talk about the trips that we do.
It's always very, very fun. And if it helps, somebody that, and maybe he's here, hey Peter, somebody that traveled with us to Antarctica, later traveled to Falklands, South Georgia with us, and is going back for round 2 in Falklands, South Georgia. And hopefully we'll get him to Patagonia soon enough. So yeah, really builds one trip on top of the next, and it'll leave you waiting for more.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everyone.